Second shooting is something that I've done for quite a while, and it's something that I still do. I enjoy it. I find it really helps me to kind of keep up to date with other photographers, see what people are doing, see how people are working, to try different things, and to maybe take a step back from being the main shooter and spend a little bit more time on that documentary photography that we all love. So if you're starting out in wedding photography, if you've never shot a wedding before, if you have shot a couple of weddings but you want to see how other photographers work, then second shooting is a great way to do that. So what's going to be included in this short course? Well, what is second shooting is pretty self-explanatory. How to get started, how to prepare on the day, Ave as a second shooter, contracts, which some photographers use and some don't. So if you're a photographer and you want to employ second shooters, that's something you might want to think about. And a behind-the-scenes video of a wedding that I was the second shooter at, and just me talking through what I'm doing, what I'm looking at, and how I'm thinking about working with the main shooter. And at the end, we'll just sum that all up. So I'm going to do this into two parts, I think. So the first part is just going to be this presentation, me talking about second shooting. The second part will be the behind-the-scenes footage, where I had a GoPro mounted on top of my camera, so you can see what I'm doing. And what I'll do is I'll just talk over that and then show the images that I created at the end, so you can see what I was doing and what the final results were. So second shooting was second shooting. For me, if I need a second shooter, it's usually when the wedding is quite big, or there are a few different locations, or the couple want a second shooter. Now, a lot of couples do want a second shooter these days because it's something that's talked about a lot, and a lot of photographers offer second shooting as a second shooter standard. There's a lot of couple photographers, husband and wife teams, etc. So it's something that people see. So if you go to a wedding as a guest, it's quite common that you might see two photographers running around getting in people's way, as well as all the videographers that are there. Of course, a lot of people work on their own. Personally, I work on my own for most of the time, and occasionally I will have a second shooter with me, mostly for those larger weddings where there are different locations. And if people specify, if people specify that they want the prep doing in two different locations. So it's having a second pair of eyes on the wedding and a different point of view, and increasing the actual content of the set of images. So you're adding volume to that set of images and increasing the number of people that can be photographed on the day. So a typical wedding for me, maybe 100, 120 people. And on the whole, I can cope with that on my own, and I'll probably have some pictures of most of those people. But I would never guarantee to get pictures of everyone. Having a second shooter would help me to concentrate on the main wedding party, so the bride and the groom, typically, and their immediate family, the bridesmaids and the ushers, as well as increasing the amount of people photographed. It helps me to concentrate on the key people of the day, and the second shooter would then concentrate on the more peripheral people, if you like. So, and the ability to be in two places at once. So the main things for me as a second shooter, or when I'm booking a second shooter, is that we have one person to cover one partner in the morning getting ready, and one person to cover the other partner in the morning getting ready. So one photographer can go to, if there's a church, when weddings are quite kind of geographically challenging, you may get ready in a house or a hotel, and then they go off to a church, and then they go on to a venue, and occasionally there's a second venue. Not very often, but it does happen. And to spend a lot of time traveling in between, it means that you're spending less time shooting. So having a second can fill in those little gaps and kind of minimize the stuff that you might miss from traveling around. So, for example, I may go and do the bridal prep. My second photographer would shoot the groom prep. Second photographer would then go onto the church and photograph the groom, the groomsmen, ushers and family at the church, and the guests arriving. So what it means is I can spend longer with the bridal party and be there until the last moments when they're ready and they're leaving, where they're getting ready to go to the church. And I know that I'm not missing anything. I know that there's no stress from my point of view in being able to park up and get started in shooting at the church. So for you as a second shooter, what are the benefits of being a second shooter? Well, you can add images to your portfolio, and this obviously needs to be cleared with the photographer, which would also need to be cleared with the couple. But on the whole, photographers would allow second shooters to use images for their portfolio, learning from others. So it's a good way to see how other people work, what their approach is like, how they shoot weddings, how they scope out portrait locations, how they organize group pictures, and everything else in between. It's good experience. It's experience being in the wedding situation, especially if you've not done that before, if you've had very little chance to do that. It's just being there and being comfortable with that environment, getting to know how it works and how you fit in, how you communicate with the staff at the venue, for example, and with the couple and their guests. And it's an opportunity to slow down. So for me, when I'm second shooting, there will be things that I need to get from the wedding for the main photographer. But as far as the documentary photography goes, if I'm doing that on my own, I'm aware that I need to do other things as well. So I don't spend as much time kind of lining up or waiting for moments to happen as I do if I'm a second shooter, when I do have a little bit more time to be able to just stop and breathe and listen to what's going on, think about where the action is, think about where the light is, and try and frame up an image and wait for the moment to happen, which I do more when I'm second shooting than I do when I'm the main shooter on my own. And it's also the chance to be creative, because on the whole, you know that the main shooter is getting everything that they need for the main story of the day, for the main batch of images, and the things that you're going to do as a second shooter add to that. So of course the photographer will have images of the kiss during the ceremony, walking down the aisle, arriving at the church, all of the usual stuff. So to have something that's a little bit different from a different point of view, then that's going to be it's going to be good for you portfolio wise, because it's going to perhaps give you something interesting that you can show. And it's going to help the main photographer because they'll have different points of view and different creative angles of the same scene. Because as the main photographer, there of course is that pressure to get a clean, normal looking shot before you start to be creative. And in busy weddings, there's not perhaps as much chance to be creative as I might like as a main photographer. And to build a reputation, of course, you'll meet people at the wedding and you'll meet the main photographer, and to produce a good set of images for that main photographer and to work well with them, that's only going to be good for you if you're starting out in business, because there are a lot of photography communities, and if your main photographer is well established, then they may recommend you to other photographers who are looking for a second shooter in your local area as well. So how do you become a second shooter? Well, it's quite a difficult thing to get into apparently these days, because I do hear a lot of people saying they're struggling to find second shooting gigs, especially if they're starting out. And there are a lot of complaints really from new people saying, why don't established photographers give more opportunities to new photographers coming into the industry? Well, there are a few ways that you can go about trying to get second shooter gigs. The first one is to join local networks, organizations, Facebook groups, training courses, etc. So you need to start to integrate yourself into the wedding photography community and make connections with people, make connections with established photographers, make yourself known within those groups, and join any kind of training courses or local networks with your fellow wedding photographers. And you can pitch yourself to other photographers via Messenger or email. Now, I get a lot of emails from people asking if they can come with me to second shoot on weddings. So, and they're not always great. They don't always link to a portfolio. It can be quite time consuming. I do get a lot of them. The best way, probably in my opinion, is to message people using Messenger or Instagram. So if you comment on people's work and you like their photographs and make them remember your name, and then you can message via Instagram or Facebook Messenger. So the other way, and probably the easiest and the best way, is to get yourself a mentor. Now, a lot of people who have been established in the industry for quite a while will offer mentorship. Now, the mentorship quite often includes shadowing, second shooting, and the other way around as well. So as far as my mentorship program goes, which is through the Patreon at the moment, which is patreon.com/Stephen Rooney, and that's Stephen with a V. I have mentees who will come with me to weddings, and now initially they'll come with me just to shadow and see what it's like, just to get a feel for being at the wedding. And I use those people and people who I've mentored in the past to use as second shooters, and give those people opportunities to come along and build their portfolio even further. And with the top tier mentoring program that I do, I also come to one of your weddings and I work as a second shooter. So with all those second shooter opportunities, I also go through the images with the photographer, and we talk about the day and how what the challenges were and how we could have done it better. And we talk about the images and do a little critique of that as well. So how do you become a second shooter? Well, it's quite tricky, but it's really about building relationships and starting to talk to people in the industry. So there are networks and organizations, groups, training courses that you can join. A lot of them are on Facebook. There are some paid networks as well and paid organizations that you can join. Not only do you get a listing, but you also get an invitation to Facebook groups and other events, so you can start to build networks and mention to people that you're looking to build your portfolio and you're looking for second shooting opportunities. So creating relationships. There's nothing wrong with emails. Don't tend to get noticed by a lot of photographers who are busy, and they get a lot of emails from people. I certainly do, and Instagram messages mostly as well. So perhaps the best way to contact a photographer is to perhaps just message them on Messenger directly. Just introduce yourself, just say that you're available, and perhaps have some kind of portfolio that you may have done. I know it's difficult when you're starting out to get a portfolio, but anything you've got, images, friends, family, that kind of thing, that you can show is great. But yeah, just kind of trying to join in as many places as possible. So a few things to think about before the day. Now, if you are employed as a second shooter, this is more important. Occasionally, you may be working as a second shooter, or you may be shadowing the main photographer, in which case this isn't as important, but still worth thinking about. So before the day, check what and if you will be paid, and is there a contract? We'll come on to contracts later on, but the contract protects you and it protects the main photographer. Just make sure that you're going to be paid and that everybody understands what's going on, so there are less grey areas and you're not feeling awkward about asking for money. Check the timings, so check when you're supposed to start, the locations, check how long it's going to take you to get there, make sure you arrive early and that you're not late. Check the distance between the venues if you're going from one venue to another. Check the file format that the photographer wants to use. Is it RAW files, is it JPEGs? And if you're used to just shooting in JPEG, you may need to just change the settings in your camera so that you shoot RAW files for the photographer to work with. Synchronize your watches. So make sure if you're using two cameras that they both have the same time stamp and date on them. And check with the main photographer what clock. So quite usually people want to synchronize to the world clock. So just if you go online, you can find that and make sure your cameras are synced to that, because getting those images afterwards, and if the cameras aren't all synced, it's quite problematic to start editing and organizing files in the right order. It's a bit fiddly. So check if your main photographer wants a mix of portrait and landscape orientation. There are some photographers who will just shoot in landscape orientation. So if you're going to be shooting vertically, portrait orientation, then the images might not be much use to that photographer. So just make sure that that's okay if you do that as well. Help with organization during a day, call for groups, ask the photographer what they need help with if they haven't given you a brief, which hopefully they will have. Help with organization, call the groups, fizz the dress. I've put a typo in there. Fix the dress so you can make sure the wedding dress is falling correctly. You can maybe hold it if they're walking and there's wet ground, for example. Fetch the bouquet. These things that sometimes cause the photographer a few issues on the day, just time consuming, really, fetching people, making sure they've got flowers and tidying things up. But if you could do that, it really helps. Take individual portraits if you want, so just pictures of couples who are there, the parents together, any of the siblings with their partners. These all add to the set of images and will add value for the couple and for the family. Ask the main shooter to make their expectations clear before the day. Perhaps should have put this one at the beginning of this section. But what do they want from you? For me, it's typically don't shoot where I'm going to be shooting. Shoot the peripheral guests. Don't necessarily concentrate on the bride and groom and the bridesmaids and ushers. Capture all the detail. Try and get different angles. Shoot from, so typically on the day I'll be shooting from the front of the church or the ceremony area. So the second photographer will be shooting from the back down the aisle. That's the main angle that I want covered, and that's the main shot that I want from the wedding because I can't get it because I'm stuck at the front, and then other bits and bobs that are going on. So ask the main shooter, what do you want? What do you want from me? What kind of pictures do you need? What kind of pictures do you not need? Occasionally, the photographer may give you SD cards before the wedding, so you can use their cards. Typically, most cameras now have 2 card slots, so ensure that you're using both card slots just in case of corruption. So do they want you to give the SD cards and they'll post them back to you to use their SD cards, or do they want you to cull the wedding and put the raw files in a Dropbox or something like that? So just make sure you know what's going on and the timescales involved. So do some do's and don'ts on the day. This is quite useful. Do cover everything the main shooter's asked you to do. So that's from them. That's what they want. That's vitally important, and that's what you're getting paid for. Be aware of the main shooter so you don't get in their frame. Another typo in there. I need to read through these things. You wouldn't believe that I did a course in copywriting, but I did. But it doesn't help if you don't read things back properly. So you ask your main shooter what lens they're using. Try and be aware of the field of vision and where you're going to be in the frame, and if you need to kind of duck out the way or stand to one side or further back, etc. So don't get in the way at all, ever, of the main shooter. They're getting paid to do the job, and they don't want you in the scene at all, if possible. Sounds a bit harsh, but don't get in the frame. So shoot parts of the wedding where the main shooter isn't. So if the main shooter is shooting the drinks reception, or if he's concentrating, or she is concentrating on the bride and groom in the center of the drinks reception, concentrate on the people who are on the periphery. Other parts of the venue, get some wide shots. Wide shots are also good of the church, of the venue, detail shots, that kind of stuff. Check in with the main shooter from time to time. Just check that everything's okay. Do they need help with anything? Does he or she need you to round people up? Or is there anything specific that they may have remembered that they need you to go and do that they might not have time for? For example, if it was my wedding, I would typically go into the wedding breakfast room to photograph the room, wide shot of the room, details, favors, flowers, that kind of thing. Sometimes when it's busy with family groups and all that kind of stuff, or especially in the winter time, which I'm recording this now in November and it gets dark about 4:00, then you're trying to do a lot of stuff before it goes dark. So quite often I don't get much chance to get into the room and photograph the room before it gets dark and people start to come in to eat. So that kind of stuff can happen. So just check in with your main shooter. Just check that everything that they need is going to plan. And if there's any way you can step in to help out, maybe bring them a drink as well if they're busy, because that's always appreciated. Be polite to people because you're working for the brand of the main shooter. You need to be aware that it's their reputation that is on the line here. Help out with gathering people. Said that already. Be creative. Said that already. So they're the things to do, things to not do. Don't keep shooting over the main shooter's shoulder. That's quite annoying, and it's duplicating images that the main shooter is getting. The only times that you might want to do that is if, let's say, it's a confetti line and the main shooter is shooting a wide lens. You may shoot from the same position with a long lens so that the images are different. There's no point getting the same images, but check with your main shooter that they want you to do that and not get a different angle altogether. So don't duplicate what the main shooter is doing. Remember, this is not a chance to build portfolio for you. This is working for the main shooter. And when they get the images back onto their computer, they're not going to want tons and tons of the same scene from the same angle. Don't stand around doing nothing. Always try and carry on shooting. There's always something to be had. If you don't look at your phone all the time, which is professionalism. Don't get drunk and vomit on the bride, goes without saying. And don't try and sell your services to wedding guests while you're working under somebody else's brand. So typically, not always, and not all weddings are typical these days, which is a great thing. But if I'm second shooter, this is typically what I get asked to do, groom prep. And it's typically what I will ask my second shooters to do. So I will go to the bride wherever they may be getting ready. The second shooter will go to the groom, usually an hour or so after I've already started. So there are a few tips for shooting groom prep. Again, this depends on your main photographer from one to the next. You're trying to photograph the scene. So at this point, what we're trying to do is balance out the prep images from the bride and the groom. So details, you're photographing people getting ready, just go in, talk to the groom, talk to the ushers, just have a bit of a laugh with them, have a bit of banter if you are that way inclined. Window light is good. The middle image, for example, you can do anything by a window, so just bits and bobs of getting ready. It doesn't necessarily have to be posed, and it probably is better if it's not posed. But if you're in a hotel, for example, the groom, unfortunately, the groom quite often gets ready in a worse hotel than the bride, but the lighting can be quite bad. So one tip from me, and one thing I do quite a lot, is I turn all the lights off in the room, especially if they're those kind of yellowy halogen spotlights. Turn all the lights off in the room and ask the groom to go and stand by the window while he just puts finishing touches on his clothing, buttonholes, ties, cufflinks, and all of that kind of stuff. Some photographers will ask you to get detailed pictures of shoes and ties and things like that. It's not that common, but just check with your main photographer what they want from that. So then the groom's party, finishing up, getting ready, getting buttonholes on at the venue or the church, which are the little flowers that go in the lapel, and guests arriving. You need to check with the main photographer. Does the main photographer want you to get a picture of the groom with all the ushers and the groom with his family and or parents? Because that is also quite useful, because that is what the main photographer will likely do with the bride and the bridesmaids. And again, it's about balancing out that coverage at the beginning of the day.